it would seem to me that a neurodiverse employee would feel much more comfortable in a highly unstructured, decentralized, and diverse or distributed work environment, where essentially they would have the ability to do things that they feel comfortable doing at home, and things that they feel comfortable doing with others in an office, that they could do that. And they could do that on their own schedule, or utilizing the person on the other end, the people on the other end that they're working with in terms of how they interact best, versus that would be better for them than, I have this picture of a Chinese workplace where there's one guy sitting up on a stand, and then there's 500 people all wearing the same clothes doing the same thing. So I don't think they would feel comfortable there at all. So I'm just trying to lay some groundwork here that, generally speaking, neurodiverse people would feel better in a less structured environment than a more structured environment. Is that true?
Yes, but
Okay.
so for a sample set of individuals, having less structure, less rigidity actually is better for them in the way that their brains and bodies are wired. But it's a spectrum. Like, human beings are a spectrum. And so there are individuals who, if given full autonomy and self-agency because of the way their brains and bodies are wired, that actually would be detrimental for them. And so I'll give you just an example. I'll use my kids, for example. I have one child who is autistic. I have 4 kids, but one is autistic and one is ADHD. I won't get into the nuances of each of those, except for the fact that my ADHDer really struggles in rigidity and structure, because the very nature of how their brain is wired to sit in one place for any, period of time during a period of energetic depletion would actually be detrimental to their health and well-being. And they wouldn't be productive. They wouldn't be engaging. It would be bad for them to have so much rigidity and structure. But my other one, who is autistic, actually, if they don't have guardrails and they're not really clear about, okay, so on Monday, I'm coming in and I'm doing this from this time to this time. If given the fluidity of making a choice on their own, they actually would struggle in that environment if they didn't have some kind of a guardrail. And so I think the point I'm trying to make is there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And when we're talking about true neuroinclusion, it's recognizing that, and I'll just use these 2 neurotypes just because they tend to be sort of opposite. ADHDers, just as a framework, as an overview, gross generalization, ADHDers and autistic individuals, they need different things. But in order for your workplace to be really inclusive, you have to understand what those nuances are and provide opportunities to support both brain types.
Okay, well, that does make sense, and I can see that perspective. Going to the workplace, and I mentioned that neurodiversity is not one of my strengths in this business, but in my little research that I was able to do over the last couple of days, Copilot is saying that 15 to 20% of the global population is neurodivergent. More than 25.
Probably. I mean, that's the statistics. I mean, that's the statistics thrown around everywhere.
Okay, well, that's 1 in 5. I mean, that's still a significant portion of the workforce.
I think it's higher, and I think it's higher for a number of reasons. But yeah, that's a pretty universally accepted statistic that it's usually 1 in 5. I just, given the work that I do, I actually think it's much higher than that.
Okay. Well, given that, the reality is that virtually every organization is going to have a comparable level of neurodivergent people working with them. So in terms of helping counsel organizations as how to deal with this issue, and what we just talked about in terms of the level of controls that are helpful in a neurodiverse person, how do you structure, what recommendations would you have to managers, HR people, in terms of how they deal with that within their organizations and how they communicate whatever those things are to the line managers, the team leaders, and others who are involved in managing these people.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna answer that question, but I'm gonna preempt the answer with a couple of things. So hopefully you can kind of bear with me. So yes, neurodivergent, diverse thinkers, diverse brains and bodies are in our workplaces. I think the challenge with the neurodivergent population is that those, I will say, I hate this word, but I will use it just for this context, those disabilities are invisible. And so unlike somebody who needs a wheelchair or, needs other physical accommodations, that's easier to solve. So you're right. When you can't see what someone's challenged with, it makes it really hard, even for well-intentioned organizations, to create programs and policies and scaffolding for their employees that makes sense, right? Because if you can't see, how do you address something you can't see?
Right.
So there is that, and I will just make that as a baseline statement. The other thing, before we sort of get too far down the rabbit hole, I want to make sure that you both know, and anybody who happens to be listening, I am not a psychiatrist, psychologist. I am not a clinician. I come at my work from what we would call the social model, not the medical model. I am not licensed or trained. And so everything that I talk about is through lived and learned experience.
Mm-hmm.
I am neurodivergent. I have 4 neurodivergent children. I have 2 neurodivergent nephews, and I have 3 neurodivergent sisters. And I come from a very long line of extremely neurospicy people. So a lot of what I'm saying is just been my experience in the work that I've done, for my whole life. So the reason that I said I think our numbers are higher is because I think what a lot of people forget when they say that 1 in 5, that's like a diagnosis. Those are people that are like getting a clinical diagnosis. And we don't have to get down that rabbit hole, but clinical diagnosis that says I am this or I have that, those are based in the methodology and the belief that anything that is divergent from societally expected norm, so divergent, is something that needs to be treated, cured, like almost like a pathology that needs to be cured.
Right.
Okay. So anybody that says, I'm neurodivergent, I have this diagnosis, that is typically, that 1 in 5 has gone through some sort of medically evaluated process. Why I say it's actually probably a higher number is because our brains, all of our brains are diverse and different. And so you can have someone who needs specific things for their brains and bodies that don't have a clinical diagnosis. That doesn't exclude them from the needs. It excludes them from that statistic that we always use, but it doesn't exclude them from benefiting from any accommodations that we have.